All right, so in order to help with finishing out this course, I'm going to record the demos that we would have done the 4th and 5th weeks. Before that, I'm going to just overview the last project. So if you go to week 3 real quick, we have the 3rd project, which normally hasn't been modified, but this semester we're modifying it. So we're going to cover this content in the demos, but you're not going to be required to do it again on your own for the project to be graded on your ability to do it on your own. If you would like to try, you can definitely add that, but I'm not going to count off points. So the last project is going to be an instructional video. And I would encourage you to start recording and planning out your ideas right away. If you want to email me, you can. Upon completion of this project, you should be able to animate graphics using keyframing and effects, utilize masks and layers to create a new imagery, and integrate with Photoshop and/or After Effects. So I'm going to show you how to do those things in the demos. You're going to create a 3 to 5 minute instructional video explaining how to do something. There must be a title, credits, and end slate. Additionally, you must use at least 2 motion graphics and 1 mask. That part of it is going to be removed, so you don't have to worry about the motion graphics and masks. I'll show you how you can do some of that though. You can use imagery, audio, or video from other sources, but they must be under Creative Commons, and you have to credit it in your video. For the end slate, you must create icons, links to the first project you made in the course, and reference them so that viewers can view your other content. We can take a look at how to do that. I showed that in this our last class, but just to go over it again. Export your video and upload it to YouTube, and use their features to create links to other videos, then upload your video onto Canvas by the end of the day. You can go here to look at other examples that other people have done. Just before I forget, an end screen is really just a place for you to link to other videos. You'll have a space that you can put your channel icon on there. So you just want to make sure that you leave some space where you're not going to have these things linked and kind of blocking awkwardly stuff that you have. End screens have sort of changed over time, how YouTube used to create them. Things changed a lot when Flash players stopped being supported by Apple devices, and the app for YouTube really changed how you used to be able to customize and link things. It looks like most of these are kind of newer examples of kind of templates that you could kind of create. End screens used to kind of be able to customize a little bit more, but to make it easier for people to look at on their phones, usually you'll have kind of about 2 boxes, and these dimensions are fixed. You can resize them a little bit. You have a spot for your icon. You could put some information about like where your social media links and everything are. It's kind of difficult to associate them and actually get them to link in your actual end screen on YouTube. But you can kind of use these as a guideline. Like here, this one has the text for their different channels, your link. So you're going to want to create that, and then just text, and then just it's going to be a matter of editing everything together. So this should be really similar to the first project. Just give you a little bit more practice. If you can practice your transitions. You could apply different color adjustment effects. You could try other effects for impact. So we're going to go to week 4, and I want you to download this file. I zipped it so it wouldn't take up so much space, and then I want you to also download Teeth. So we're going to download, save this. I'm going to download, save this file as well. When you have the zip folder downloaded, right click on it and extract it. And I might need to start cleaning this up a little bit, but Inside of here, you should have this file. If you want to, you could actually move it outside, or you could leave it there. It's kind of up to you. Just remember that's inside of this TMP folder. And then we have our PNG file. So we're gonna practice with layering files. I don't think we've really had a chance to talk about the differences of like JPEG versus PNG files. PNG files are really great if you're wanting to layer something over top. You maybe have tried to make a PowerPoint or something before where you had some files. Let me see if I can find a good example. All right, so I had to go to Google Images in order to find a better picture. This Apple actually does a good job of demonstrating the differences between JPEG and PNG. JPEG files aren't transparent, and so they're always going to have a white background around them. So even though you don't necessarily see the file, or you're editing it in, let's say, Photoshop, and it has this checker background, the minute that you save it as a JPEG, it's going to fill in that background space with a white background. So if you want to layer something where you have this transparency around it, but the file dimensions are actually going to go beyond this, you're going to want to save it as a PNG file. PNG files tend to be larger, so you don't really want to save something as a PNG unless you actually need the transparency. Both of them are going to work as raster images. Speaking of, if you were going to work with a logo or text, you'd want to work with a vector image rather than raster. A raster image is going to use pixels, so if you try to scale that image up, actually this is kind of a good picture. So like with Photoshop, where you are painting with a brush, if you zoom in on it, you're going to see these actual individual pixels. So it's only going to look so good if you resize it, versus vectors create these lines that are using an algorithm to figure out the actual curves of it. And these are really great. You can go back and you can change the points by changing the anchor points, and you can infinitely scale these smaller or larger if you need to. So that's why we're using the PNG file, so we can layer this. We are going to create a cinemagraph. And we're gonna take a look at what cinemagraphs are first. Cinemagraphs are essentially kind of a marriage between a photograph and a video. It's this fancy term for a GIF where you're taking a small video and you're looping it. That would be the least amount of work. A lot of these are actually done by layering things or masking off content, which is what we're going to do. We're going to use this as an opportunity to practice masking. So often you'll take a video and you will choose a single frame from the video and you will mask off a certain area. So like if we're looking at this one where we have the cup of coffee that's being stirred, we have to kind of guess, but since the only area we see moving is the hand and we have this shadow, we can kind of assume that all of the content from about here has been masked. So everything here is a still image and then this area is a video. On this one, this looks like it's just looping. It doesn't look like there's necessarily anything in particular masked off as far as like this one goes. But what we might have is a mask to make it look like we're seeing through a lens, where we might have a mask that's going around the outside of the frame to make it look like this is blurry. Maybe it's actually the same thing. So kind of a different idea with masking. It's not like the leaves aren't moving at all on the outside of it, but it has a different effect. You see a lot of cinemagraphs as in sort of like fashion. Cinemagraphs can be a really great way if you want to try to upload video to a website though, without having to have a really long video. Animated posters are a great example of creating a GIF that you could use to show information, make it look a little more interesting. This one we have this compass that is moving. We also have the rabbit over here, and you'll notice the shoes are sparkling, everything else is still. These can be kind of difficult to set up. Like if we look at this driver here, making sure that the arm and everything sort of lines up is a little bit difficult. This one, most of it looks like it could all have been in motion, just taken from like a very simple shot and then just looped back and forth. This one, we might have a mask here that's just for the cars, and then everything else, except for the Eiffel Tower, is moving. Same here, we could have masked out this area and just have the water moving. So these take a little bit of planning ahead of time, but they can be very interesting. This I just found by typing in Cinemagraphs. This is 40 examples. So you can kind of take a look at these. Again, some of them are just clips that are repeated. Some of them are actually masked off. So we have our teeth, and then we have our file here. This is a very short file. If you click on it and you play it, it's just barely a couple seconds long. We're just gonna have this loop. But what we have here is he is describing the purpose of the teeth and explaining what happens, and his hands are moving around and the teeth are chattering. So what we're going to try to do is find a still shot so everyone will be still, but then the teeth will keep chattering on their own. So let's get started. Open up Premiere. I'm gonna create a new project. I'm gonna call this Cinemagraph. This is gonna save on my desktop. That's gonna be fine. We're going to bring in this video file, and then also the teeth. I'm gonna swap this view so we can see this a little better. So I'm gonna bring the teeth over into the timeline. And you'll notice this is super short. So it's gonna go real quick. So the first thing we want to do is we want to figure out which frame we want to use as our mask. I would suggest picking a point where his hands are going to be furthest away from the object. It's going to make it easier to mask. So I'm going to pick about this point. So kind of the 2/3 mark. And what we're going to do is, so in this top area where we have the final preview, you'll notice there's this camera and it says export frame. So the second from the right icon, we're going to click on this. And what happens is it's going to take a picture of the frame that you have selected when you are on this exact playhead spot. So if I click on this, it's going to say export frame. I can choose the name of it. So I'm going to choose background because that's going to be our mask. I can choose the type of file. For this one, it's fine for it to be a JPEG. I can choose the location. So I might want to go ahead and put this in the same folder as the other ones. Hit select folder. And then something that's really helpful is we have this import into project. That means it's going to bring the image into our bin with everything else. Otherwise, you'd have to import it again. So this helps save some time. So I'm going to hit OK. And it can be a little hard because now we have all of these different pictures over and over again, but you'll notice this one is the video, then we have the sequence, we can tell because of the icon, and then we have this one called background. I'm going to grab background and I'm going to drag it in. You'll notice background is a lot larger because images default to 5 seconds long. So we're going to actually want to select the end of this and drag it so it lines up. All right, so we have our picture, which is going to be over top of our video. If we play through, you'll notice that we don't actually see anything. Technically, we can put these in the opposite order. We could put the video on top. I'll show you how you could change that, but for now, we'll just have the picture blocking everything. So you want to make sure that you select your background picture, and then we're going to go to Effect Controls. And this is where we're going to take a look at opacity. So I mentioned before in the other video that there's these different tools here. This is actually what we're going to use. This is going to create a mask depending on whichever layer that you have selected. So we have the option of creating an ellipse tool. We can create a square or we can create a pen. I'm going to show you a couple of these so you have an idea of how they're going to work. So I'll start with the Create Ellipse tool. And it's going to start off by making a mask all on its own. You'll notice that everything inside of it is still, and then everything outside of it is going to move. The way the ellipse works is it has these different anchor points. So we can kind of change the size and the shape. So it's more of like an ellipse. I can try to bring this in so it's more like a circle. You'll notice there's these handlebars. Now, on the left we have mask feather, mask opacity, and mask expansion. These handles are going to change those values, so we can change how much the values are going to feather, so they're going to slightly blend into each other. This is good if you're trying to make something look natural. This we have such a seamless cut that it doesn't really matter. Mask expansion is going to change the mask so it goes beyond that container. See if I can get this to show back up again. So we want these to actually be pretty close to this line. Mask opacity is going to make it so like if you have 100%, it'll ask like mask everything off completely. If we had it 50-50, it would show 50% of the layer underneath. So very similar to just regular opacity. So what's happening here is we have the opposite of what we want. His hands are moving, he's explaining it, but the teeth are not moving. So we actually want to click on inverted, and it's going to change these. So now the teeth are moving, but his hands aren't. So this is where we could actually do the opposite, where we could have had the video over top of the background, but instead we wouldn't bother with inverting it. So it's going to depend on if you want to basically cut a hole out of a layer that you have, or if you want only that circle to exist and everything else to not exist. So the way this one's working is we're kind of creating a window to look through. So this is going to be our mask. You might accidentally create multiple masks. If you do that, you can always go back here and under opacity, you can look for your different masks. We can also delete these. So I can select this and hit remove. I'm going to do this so that way we can take a look at using this other one. And I'm going to zoom in a little. And then I'm going to click on opacity and then the pen tool, and this will allow for me to Bingley. I'm gonna click on opacity and then the pen tool, and this will allow for me to freeform draw around. Now you have to be careful because if you go too close to another anchor point, that's what these little points are called, it'll actually try to prompt you to rotate instead. So you want to go just far enough that it's not going to make you do that, and then you'll want to select it so that way they all come together. If you need to make it a little larger, you can, and then you can always bring these anchor points back in a little closer. So I kind of like using this freeform tool to draw so that way I can get kind of a precise shape. So this is cutting it a little close with this hand, but I think we're going to be all right. And then again, we want to make sure we invert it. We don't really need to change these other settings. So this is kind of short. I think I'm going to go ahead and copy this file and duplicate it using Control-C and Control-V. I'll stretch this image out because it should fit no matter what. This will just make it a little bit longer. So that's going to cover masking. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is going to be working with our teeth file. So I'm going to draw this, I'm going to bring this in, shorten this to match. So I zoomed in a little bit so it's easier to see the mask, but I'm going to change this to fit. Sorry, my cat is making a lot of noise in the background. Bingley, stop it. So I'm gonna select motion this time. We're gonna position this. I'm gonna put this over his head. Scale it down a little bit. And next we're gonna take a look at keyframing. So if I just look up keyframing real quick, this gives you a nice definition. A keyframe in animation and filmmaking is a drawing that defines the starting and end points of any smooth transition. The drawings are called frames because their position and time is measured in frames on a strip of film. So if we look at an image, we have these distinct keyframes where different positions are happening, and then we have the trajectory of how we're getting from these points to each other. There's different types of interpolations. That's what it's called when we are moving from point to point. Like you'll notice there's a bit of a curve to this line. That's changing that interpolation. So by default, all of your interpolations are linear. Let me see if I can find an image. So here we would have a linear interpolation. It just means you have multiple points. Let's say we're changing the scale and it's going at an exact pace. Bezier is going to be curved, so that's going to allow for you to ease in and ease out. Let me see if I can find an image. So easing in and easing out is going to make the movement look more smooth. So here we have this shifting over. You're going to see a lot more frames as it's starting up in speed and then as it's slowing down. So you can think of it like driving a car where it takes a while for it to build up momentum and then it also takes a while for it to brake. If you're really interested in learning about animation, you can look up the 12 Principles of Animation. Trying to figure out which one of these is going to be the best. They're using kind of the same video, so we'll probably stick to this one. So this is talking about this 12 principles. Here we have squash and stretch. So thinking about how things prepare themselves to move and how they actually move, how the mass changes. Anticipation. So like if somebody were to jump into the air, they have to bend their knees first in order to be able to jump. So in this one, it's having to kind of gain momentum in order to tip itself over. Staging. This is kind of getting people's attention so they know to look, otherwise they'll miss what they're looking at. This is going to be more for 2D animation rather than the motion graphics we're going to do, so you don't have to worry about this so much. Here we have follow through and overlapping action. So as it's stopping, it's taking a while for the rest of the figure to kind of catch up and also stop. So moving a little beyond the point and then kind of coming back to a standstill. Here we have slow in and slow out. This is what we're talking about when we think about ease in, ease out. So again, if we're driving, it takes a little while for it to build up in speed, and then it takes a little while for us to slow down again. Arc. Things in nature follow an arc because of gravity. You can kind of change the way that something feels in mass based off the arc. So if you are able to have a lightweight object, it might have a slightly different type of arc to it than if it was really heavy. Or you could also change the feeling of the gravity if it's in space. Here we have secondary action, timing, exaggeration, so kind of giving character, just being good at drawing, appeal, making something charming. So not all of those are tying in exactly to what we want to look at. These are going to be the different icons that you're going to see when you're working with After Effects, but you'll have linear, you can hold a value. So when we are creating our values, we basically have, like, if we have this location, this is our first value, then we have our second one, and then this value is going to gradually change over time from that. You can also create a hold though. Where did this go? So if we created a point and we held the value, it would stay that value until we choose a different one. So we're going to go to our file. I'm going to move this to the beginning. Make sure I have teeth selected. And we're going to go to the stopwatch for, let's do rotation. So if we toggle animation, that means we are putting a keyframe down. Now this keyframe is a little difficult to see. I can't really resize this too well. But essentially we have a keyframe now. This is linear. And then what I'll want to do is move this playhead, and you'll notice it's actually moving down here as well. So any of the effects we're doing here will be affected down here. And I'm going to want to create another keyframe by clicking on this kind of diamond shape, add remove keyframe. So I would say, like, one issue that people tend to do is as they're trying to change a value, they might accidentally make another keyframe right next to it. If you have a bunch of keyframes next to each other, you might accidentally create a bunch of values that sort of contradict, and it'll make it look very jittery. So if you're having a hard time, I would say remove these and click on a new one. You can step through your keyframes using these arrows. I would make sure that you have the one that you want selected in blue before you make any changes. Usually what I recommend is make your keyframes first and then add the values to them. You can also use Shift to help you snap to the one. You'll notice if I don't use Shift, it doesn't really snap. I have to make sure it lines up, but if you hold Shift, it'll make sure to snap. So this first one, I'm going to leave at 0. Again, I could also use these points to help. So the first one will be 0. This is where that rotations will come in. So we're going to work on this one, and I'm going to choose, let's move this over, and I'm going to do 3 rotations and then 14 degrees. So what's going to happen here is in between this point here, where it's 0, and this point here is going to rotate 3 times and then another additional 14 degrees. So if I actually play this,
and
you'll notice it actually span through. If I spread this point out further, let's see, let's try to make them at the very beginning and end. It'll make it look like it's, it'll make it look like it's going a little slower. I could move these closer to each other. And you'll notice before this first point, it's staying 0. And then after this point, it is staying in that position. So the only places it's changing is in between these values. So if you wanted more things to change, you're going to need to add more values. So there's happening really quickly. What we could do is we could essentially create a loop. I could select this one, do Control C, and then I'm going to move my playhead where it's at. I'm going to do Control V, and now I have 3 points. So I could play through.
And then
it's going to rotate the one direction, and then it's going to rotate back. So it happens so quickly you can't really see that it's changing direction. We might change, try to put these as far apart as we can.
And then.
So kind of wacky. Next, we can play around a little bit. I'm going to add some text here. I'm going to type in and whoops, and then, and I'm going to zoom out a little so it's a little easier to work. The text can be a little tricky as it's moving. What I'm essentially going to do is try to have the text come from off the screen. So I'm going to change the size of this text so everything fits. It's starting here. I'm going to make sure the text is selected, go to position, toggle this, and if you click off of it, it will just reset it so that way you only have the one value. You only really want to click on this stopwatch if you plan on having something change over time and animate it. So I'm going to click on position, and then I'm going to move it all the way to the end, and then I'm going to create another keyframe, and then I'm going to change the position so that way it goes all the way across the edge. I'm having a hard time seeing that, so I created another one so it'd be a little easier to see. So let's play that. And you know what, for some reason I've noticed that this text is really finicky if you have it go completely off the screen. I'm going to try this again, create a different graphic, and this time keep it on the screen. Or at least keyframe it first on the screen and then see if I can take it off screen. So I'll probably go about halfway, move it right here, hit position, keyframe it. I'm going to create another position. This time I'm going to move it off screen over here. I'm going to move it over here, create another keyframe, make sure I have that selected, move this off screen over here. So now it's working, so I'm not really sure why it's doing this, but try to keyframe it first on the screen.
And then.
All right, so there's two different ways that you can keyframe. We can also change the opacity, so if you wanted your text to come in, I just need to drop down to opacity, make sure, and it's already by default selected with a stopwatch. We can use these same points, so I could use shift to snap to this location. I could create a keyframe. I could snap to these different values. Here we go. And then here I could type in, let's do 0. I'm gonna snap over, set this to 0, keep that 100. And it happens so quickly. We could actually move this closer so we can see better what's happening. Because essentially it's gonna fade in, fade out. So here we have our cinemagraph. We've practiced using a mask. We've also practiced using 2 different types of keyframes. You're not going to be required to do this in the final project. If you want to try doing this on the final project though, you can, that's up to you. We're going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to export it. Do H.264 high bit rate. I want to change this name. I might just pick and then save. It's kind of up to you if you want to have the audio or not. We might just remove the audio. And then this is where we're going to practice integrating with other software. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. I'm going to click on open. We'll go to the desktop. Let's see, we have, and then hit open. And you don't really need to worry about everything. The reason I opened it this way is it'll take us into the video timeline view. We're gonna just go to File, Export, Save for Web. This is where we're gonna actually turn it into a GIF instead of just a video. So that way we can upload it to a website if we wanted to. It's gonna essentially compress the files, so it'll make it a lot smaller. You'll notice it'll also kind of change the quality. So we want to choose a GIF. We can do 128 dithered. Here we also have options here, so we can do GIF. Selective. These are going to be different colors, like you'll notice the color table here. I would suggest going through and figuring out which one is going to give you the best color range. So it depends on the picture that you do. Like here, adaptive I think looks better on his skin because it's showing more of those red tones. So I'll probably do adaptive. Colors 128 dither. You can change how much there is. Diffusion, you can choose pattern. Or noise. Transparency, we don't really need to worry about that. And then when you are ready, we have this option here. So we have animation, we have the option of looping forever, or just looping once. We wanted to pick forever. And then we want to hit save. We'll have some options, so we can just go ahead and save it to the desktop. It'll say if we want to save just the images, the HTML only, or the HTML and the images. So we're going to choose HTML and images, hit save. I can go ahead and close out of that. And then let's find out where, okay, so we have images and we have and then. So if you go to images, you'll have the actual GIF. Here we can actually look at it though as an HTML file. So you'll notice it's just looping on its own over and over again. So this is how you can make a GIF. So I'm going to try to move this all out of the way. And then we can get started on the last demo. So the one we just went over, this is essentially what I have everyone work on for the 4th week. And then I gave everyone an opportunity to just work on their final projects. So this would be a point where I would normally ask for you to hopefully have something recorded, sit down and talk one-on-one, figure out how things are going, take a look at footage, see if there's anything you need to re-record, and then practice going over some of these techniques if needed. So next we're going to go over our final demo. So if you go to week 5, I have got these 3 files here. I also have this video file on how to use YouTube end screen and creating cards in YouTube. We can go ahead and take a look at doing the end screen. I'm going to sign in real quick. So you're going to want to go to your icon, your channel, YouTube Studio, and then I'm going to choose one of these videos. I'll just go ahead and do this one. So once you've selected on it, if you go to the right, you have this option here for end screen. You can add cards too. This allows you to put links throughout your video. It's sort of a little link at the top or bottom. This is going to be our end screen. So they're going to have a default for how long it's going to show up on the timeline. You can move the playhead around if you want. So we're going to choose one of these. Since you just have the one video on YouTube before this, you're probably going to want to choose one of the templates that just has one and then also has a space for your icon. So we'll just click on one of these. If I move the playhead, I should see this. So we have a certain duration for this. You can change the length of these if you want. I'm just going to leave it there. You can move these around a little bit. You can resize them within reason. So for example, if we just have the one, I don't see a reason why we need it to be so small. So I'm going to just try to line those up with the third points. We can choose if we want the most recent upload, best for viewer, or choose a specific video. So that's going to be up to you which one you want to have. Here we have the time duration. It's basically 2 seconds, or it's basically 20 seconds long. You'd want to play through and see if that's enough time for what you want. So really this is it. Then I'll just hit save. And then once it's saved, I can go back. We can actually take a look. So now if I play through the end, now we have it inserting the video, and then we also have my channel icon. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and download these 3 files. You'll notice we have another PNG. I zipped this file to make it go a little quicker. So we're gonna wanna unzip it. So we have Mars, we have our green screen. We have our little rover. So I'm going to right click, extract all. Try to make a little bit of room on here, green screen. Move this out. Okay, it doesn't want me to do that, so I'll just put these next to each other. So let's go ahead and create a new project. I'm gonna call this green screen. Desktop should be fine. I'm gonna hit OK. I'm gonna close the sequence. Open up this folder. We'll bring this file in. We'll also bring in these two. So what I like about this green screen, and I'm going to show you the wrong way for doing this, and then I'm going to show you the right way. So you don't have to follow along with me for the first part. But I essentially wanted to show you how we could use a mask along with this. So I picked a green screen file. It's just a couple of seconds long, and you'll notice I told this person to sit still, so they're not moving. I do have this green screen in the back. You'll notice there's some shadows in the background. We also have this light stand over here that's in the way. This could end up being a problem if he were to be moving at all. Since he's sitting still, it's not a problem. So we're going to take this footage. I'm actually going to shift it up so that way it's on the second line. This part you can't do. We're going to grab this photo, and the photo is going to go in the background because it's going to show through. And I'm going to move this to be the same length. And then I'm going to select on the video file, the green screen one. And we're going to go to Video Effects, Keying, and then we want Color Key. So we're going to click on Color Key, and I'm going to click and drop it onto the video file. I'm going to go up to the Effect Controls, and then we are going to take a look at our settings that we have. So we have the option of the masking tools. We're going to leave that alone for now. I have the color. So usually in post-production, there's green screen mask, and then there's blue screen. So this is defaulting as if there was blue. We're going to use the eyedropper tool, and we're going to select a color in the background. Usually what you want to do is try to select somewhere close to either the face or the hands of the individual, so you get a nice clean color, especially around the hairline. So I'm going to click kind of close to his head, and you'll notice it's essentially taking out all of the colors that are that exact kind of color. And then we have some ways of tweaking this. So we have color tolerance. So if it's 0, it's going to be that exact color. If I move this all the way to 255, it's basically taking out all of the color. And you want to essentially find a happy medium where he's not disappearing, but the background is. We also have edge thin, which is going to, here, let me do this again. So here we have edge thin, and you'll notice there's this little green hairline around. We can use edge thin to kind of cut away and remove, so that helps clean up the edges, especially where the light is reflecting. We can use edge feather, that will kind of soften the transition, make it look a little more natural. But you'll notice I have this pull here. We also have this green here where there was that shadow. It was an exact color. So I'm going to actually delete this color key. And before I do all this, I'm going to click on this file again. I'm going to go to Effect Controls where we have opacity. And I'm going to use this pen tool to click around. You want to make sure you move far enough away that you don't have this accidental rotation tool with the double arrows. And this is where you might have to switch to a smaller percentage, because we're going to want to go outside of the frame. And then I can't really get close, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. I'm going to go back to fit. You can go back over and you can click to create new points. So for example, I can click there if I want a new point. We can also click and drag these closer because we don't really need it that far away. You can, this is where you'd want to play through and make sure like his breathing does move his arm a little bit. So we might want to have just a little bit of space. But we can actually get this pretty darn close. So now that we have this mask, now we would want to go and do that same process. We'll take our color key, we'll drop it, we'll select our color, put it somewhere close to his head. We'll do color tolerance. Computer's being a little slow. That looks pretty good. We don't have, in this room, had a lot of reflection. You want to try to see if you can record where you're not going to have a bunch of green light reflecting. You'll notice too that this happens more with like gray, since gray has all of the colors showing up, RGB. You'll notice that if we play through this, his sweater kind of looks noisy. And that's just because even though it's a navy shirt, it looks sort of gray. It's kind of a muted color. And so you want to be careful with the colors you're wearing. So his skin actually looks pretty good. And the reason why we pick green is because green's the opposite of our skin tones. Our skin tones have reds and yellows in them. And so green stands out really well. So does blue. It just kind of depends on what you're working with. But you'll notice that just kind of based off of the setup, it's not perfect. So we're going to go in with our edge thin. And we're going to try to, computer's lagging a little. Kind of remove a little bit of that. We can also feather it. It might even be better to just type in the value. And then this is where you would go and try to clean up the background to kind of match a little. So for example, we might want to scale this background. We'd probably want to position it a little different because we want it to look a little bit more believable, that the horizon line, this looks a little bit more natural. Considering that the resolution of the image is way nicer, we would probably also want to apply like a blur effect. So I might choose like a Gaussian blur, drop it on this picture of Mars, change this to something that just kind of helps push it back into the background. We could also do some adjustments. Maybe you want to try some color adjustments. We could do different color changes, contrast. I'm going to let you play around with it. Something that I also wanted to let you play with is this PNG file. So if we move him forward and then put this car behind, you can actually play around with keyframing. I was envisioning maybe he's a newscaster or something on Mars. Chances are he'd need to have a helmet on or something. Maybe he's right in front of a window, and you could actually keyframe this rover so that way it changes position and kind of moves across the screen. So maybe we want to actually move this further. Here we could also practice, like you could change the lighting on this. Like I would say that this would look better if I change the brightness and contrast. It looks a little too sharp, so I might want to wash it out a little bit. It's not going to look natural by any means, but you can definitely kind of play around with it a little bit. Oh, and I noticed there's a little bit of background sound, just like ambient noise from the studio, so I'm going to mute that. All right, so this is going to be doing green screen. Green screen is actually a lot better to do in a program called After Effects. And what I usually recommend that students do is, if you're going to do motion graphics or any sort of visual effects, do them in After Effects. Do your video editing in Premiere. So in this case, what I would suggest doing is we have this footage. I would probably cut it into pieces. So for this one, I actually did a bunch of different takes of different people just sitting there. So I'd probably bring them all in, cut those different pieces, put them all in a sequence how I wanted them. So I'm actually going to remove the mask and this. And I might just to demonstrate, we might just extend this so we have a longer video. So let's say this is our whole video. We could even have our transitions. So maybe I'm going to do some cross dissolves. I'm going to save this. And I'm going to open up After Effects. After Effects, if you've used Photoshop, it's sort of a combination between Photoshop and Premiere. So I'm going to go to a new project. Let me go ahead and save this. Go to desktop. I'll save this as week 5. So what I'm going to do is bring in our green screen Premiere project folder. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to click on this, hit OK, and it'll bring it in. Really, it doesn't really matter. I could just bring in this video file directly. I don't have to bring in this project file, but if you were wanting to use dynamic linking and use both, this would be the way to do it. So After Effects is a little bit different. We have our panel over here for us to preview files. Instead of sequences, they have compositions. So we're going to create a new composition. I'm going to do this by dragging this down. And you don't have to follow along for this part of it because you would have to download After Effects. I just want to show you that you can do certain things in both, but there's going to be benefits. After Effects is kind of more of a robust program. There are things that it does worse, like it does audio a lot worse. So usually I recommend doing audio either in Premiere or Audition, doing your video editing, and then bringing this in using like Illustrator to do your text, bring your text in. So a lot of it's just kind of working with those programs. And that's why Adobe software is so great, is the fact that you can seamlessly go back and forth. I could go back to my Premiere project. I could open this file, change the length of it, save it, and because everything is essentially a shortcut, it would update this information right away. So I'm going to do kind of a similar process. I'm going to click on my file. Here we have slightly different tools, but I'm going to use this pen tool. I'm going to click around, zoom. Whoops, that's a little far. I'm going to zoom around and keyframe around. Now, since I removed the Mars background picture and everything, I'm going to want to bring that back in. So let me import those. So I'm going to take Mars and drop it underneath. This is where it looks more like Photoshop with these individual layers. And this is why you want to do your video sequence editing in Premiere, because you'll notice that each layer goes all the way across. So if I were to cut this layer or duplicate it, it ends up being a different file. So I'd have to have one file basically go for this whole length and then one file for this length. So there's not a way for everything to be on the same track. All right, so we have our green screen. I'm going to go to my effects. If you know what you're typing in, you can just type in key and it'll bring up different keying options. We're going to use a plugin that's called Keylight. I'm gonna apply it to this layer. So in that case, it's really similar. And what I like is because this program is more robust, it gives you a lot more options. Like for example, here we have viewing. So what I really like to do is look at screen matte. I'm going to click on source first because first we want to choose our color. So I'm going to use the dropper tool to select a color next to his head. I'm going to do screen matte. And essentially what we're looking for is we want his silhouette to be completely white, and then we want this background area to be as dark as possible. So I'm going to try to move this, and my computer's lagging a little bit, so it's a little hard to see. You can also use screen balance a little bit, and then you can go to final result to kind of see how well you did. You can choose some of these other settings, like we have inside mask and then we have outside mask. So we can kind of play around a little bit. We have this, we can clip to black or clip to white, shrink and grow. That's going to change that edge around the outside. And without really changing anything, it looks pretty good. It's still noisy. That's just because of the footage I have. That's not really a problem with the editing. Same thing, we could go back with Mars and we can change it. What I like about After Effects is all of the effects are all right next to the layer. So I can actually change the scale and everything right here. It also is a lot friendlier for clicking on directly and moving things around. So it makes that a lot quicker. I'm gonna go see if I can find a blur. So I'm gonna drop a blur on here. And the effects show up here. I might just type in, we could probably do a little more. That's not too bad, 5. And then I'm gonna go back to project. And I'm gonna bring down this rover, drop it in between. And I'm gonna select it. And like I mentioned, it's a lot easier to move around the screen. So I'm going to keyframe the position, move this over, and then I'm going to move this just a little bit, keyframe again. It looks like that first keyframe didn't change values, so I'm gonna have to do this backwards. What I like about this too is with these keyframes, once you have at least one, you actually have this line, and we could move this, shift this around, and it'll actually create a keyframe sort of based off of it. So you almost get an idea of what it looks like. You can click on these anchor points too. And this will give you an idea. This is for the position. So if I play through, we'll actually see it take that trajectory. Something kind of cool with After Effects is it's not just editing on the timeline. You can actually edit in a 3-dimensional space. So you can create the illusion of a stage. So you can create fake lighting, you can create fake cameras. So one thing we could do is with our rover, I'm going to click on this box, and this is actually going to turn it into a 3-dimensional layer. It's still an image, so it still exists as just a very thin slice, but I can change the rotation. So I can have it rotate away from me, I can rotate it towards me. So what could happen is we could actually keyframe it, so instead of just driving across the screen, maybe we have it fly towards us on the screen. We also have these handlebars that we can use to move it in space if we wanted to. So if you want to, you can download After Effects and you can play around with this. I mostly just wanted to show you how you could green screen and then also show you how you could potentially work with both Photoshop and After Effects in conjunction with your video files. All right, so this is going to be everything. Those are the 2 demos that I want you to do. If you want to try using any of these things, you can in your last video, but mostly for your last video, I'm just looking for you to put together your instructional video. All right, contact me if you have any questions or if you would like to speak face-to-face on Zoom.